Pay attention to the woman locking her classroom door at 5:31 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. Her name is Rosa Dela Cruz. She is 29 years old. She has taught kindergarten at Greenfield International School in Jumeirah for 4 years and has not missed a single school day without calling in advance. She is carrying her bag over her left shoulder and her car keys are already in her right hand, and she is walking toward the parking structure the way she walks toward it every Tuesday after finishing her weekly lesson planning. Without hesitation, without looking back. The school's parking structure camera captures her at 5:31 p.m., crossing the ground floor toward her white Honda Jazz in Bay 34. She does not know it yet, but this is the last time she will be seen alive. By Wednesday morning, her classroom will be full of 16 5-year-olds sitting in their chairs waiting for her, and she will not come. She will never come again. The 16 chairs were already occupied when the substitute arrived at 8:22 a.m. on Wednesday. 16 5-year-olds in their seats, name cards on their desks in their own handwriting. Laminated, placed by Rosa the previous Friday with the care she applied to every small thing in that room. Looking at the door the way children look at a door when the person they expect has not come through it yet and they have not yet been told to stop expecting. The lesson plan was open on the desk. The coffee mug from Tuesday was on the windowsill. A dried ring at the base where the liquid had settled overnight. The wall behind the whiteboard held 47 names in children's handwriting under laminate. Every child Rosa had taught in 4 years at Greenfield, preserved on what she called the wall of people who already know they matter. The 47th name was Oliver, added in January. The wall was complete. The room was prepared. The teacher was not there. School principal Catherine Moorish called Rosa's mobile at 8:03 a.m. No answer. She called again at 8:17. No answer. She sourced a substitute from the Year 2 overflow staff and placed her in the classroom and stood in the corridor outside for a moment looking at the lesson plan through the door's glass panel. Phonics at 8:15. Number recognition at 9 o'clock. Free drawing at 10:30. Before she went back to her office and called the emergency contact listed on Rosa's personnel file. Her cousin Maricel Dela Cruz in Batangas, Philippines. Due to the 4-hour time difference, it was 4:03 a.m. in Batangas. Maricel did not answer. Catherine Moorish sat at her desk and used the word uncontactable in the note she wrote herself, because uncontactable felt more manageable than the word that was already forming underneath it. By 10 a.m., she had contacted the Philippine Overseas Labor Office as a precautionary measure. By 2:15 p.m., after a phone call from a parent that she had not anticipated and could not have prepared for, she called Dubai police. The parent was the mother of a child named Layla. Layla was 5 years old and had been in Rosa's class since September and had said something to her mother at lunch that her mother had initially received as a child's anecdote and then received as something else entirely. Layla said that Miss Rosa had been crying at her desk the previous Tuesday, and when Layla asked why, Miss Rosa had said that sometimes grown-ups get scared and that being brave means doing the right thing even when you are scared. Layla told her mother this not because she understood its significance, but because she had been holding it for a week and it had not resolved itself, and she had decided, in the specific way 5-year-olds decide things, to give it to someone larger to carry. Her mother called the school. Catherine Moorish listened and understood within the first minute that Rosa's absence was not administrative. She called Dubai police at 2:15 p.m. The missing person report was opened at 3:47 p.m. Wednesday. The car was found Thursday morning at 6:15 a.m. by a road maintenance worker named Hamid conducting a pre-dawn infrastructure inspection on the service road off the Dubai Al Ain highway. He noticed the white Honda Jazz on the gravel shoulder with the driver's door slightly ajar. He slowed. He approached on foot. The engine was off and cold. The car had been there through the night at minimum, possibly longer. Rosa's school ID lanyard was on the dashboard. Her sunglasses were in the cup holder. The car registration was open in the glove compartment, sitting on top of the other documents as if someone had checked it recently. Her phone was not in the car. Her bag was not in the car. The desert beyond the gravel shoulder showed tire tracks from a second vehicle, wider wheelbase, heavier build than the Honda, that had been parked adjacent to the Jazz for a period the forensic team would later estimate at between 15 and 40 minutes before moving south into the open desert on a track that did not return on the same line. Nothing went into that desert on Tuesday night and came back the way it left. Hamid called 999 at 6:22 a.m. The patrol unit that responded ran the plates, found Rosa's name, found the active missing person report, and escalated immediately. Detective Amira al-Blaushi of Dubai Police CID was assigned to the case Thursday afternoon. She was 38 years old, 15 years in the department, attached to a missing persons and homicide crossover unit that handled cases where the classification remained unclear and the cost of misclassifying was high. Her partner was Detective Hassan al-Nakbi, 34, 6 years in CID, quieter than al-Blaushi in the specific way of a partner who has learned when the other person is thinking and has stopped interrupting it. They drove to the service road together. Al-Blaushi walked the full length of the road before she looked at the car, the whole frame before the pieces, which was her habit and which had never once in 15 years produced less than the alternative. She noted the geometry from the road's edge outward. No active cameras on this service road stretch. The nearest functioning CCTV was 4.3 kilometers north at the highway on-ramp, confirmed by al-Nakbi, who walked there and back while al-Blaushi processed the scene. The gravel shoulder. Isolation deliberate. The service road used primarily by maintenance vehicles on a twice-weekly schedule. The gap between Monday's maintenance run and Wednesday's, meaning a vehicle could sit here from Tuesday evening until Thursday morning without being encountered by anyone with a reason to stop. The tire track compression. Second vehicle stationary 15 to 40 minutes. The depth and distribution of the gravel displacement consistent with a transfer of weight from one vehicle to another before the heavier vehicle moved south. The track running south into the desert. Single direction, no return line. The desert showing no disturbance beyond the track's own passage. Al-Blaushi stood beside the white Honda Jazz and looked at Rosa's school ID on the dashboard. The small laminated photograph. A woman looking directly at the camera with the composed directness of someone who has decided to present themselves as exactly what they are. She looked at the ID for a long moment. Then she looked at the desert. She understood within the first hour that Rosa Dela Cruz had not driven to a service road off the Dubai Al Ain highway and walked away voluntarily. Someone had brought her here. The question the investigation would spend the next several months answering was not where Rosa had gone. The question was which direction the decision to bring her here had come from, and who had made it, and what Rosa Dela Cruz had done or known or threatened or possessed that had made someone decide she needed to be brought to a service road in the desert on a Tuesday night in March and not brought back. She did not yet know about the secondary phone. She did not yet know about the offshore accounts, the false bottom toiletry bag, the 8 coded contacts, or the 2.3 million dirhams in untraceable transfers accumulated over 4 years from men who had paid because the alternative cost more. She was building on the visible surface of a case with a completely different architecture below it. The surface would hold for 3 more days before the apartment search produced the toiletry bag, and the toiletry bag produced the secondary phone, and the secondary phone produced a case that required al-Blaushi to set down everything she had started and build again from a different foundation. One in which the woman she was investigating was not simply a victim but a person who had been, in her own careful and deliberate way, also hunting, and who had, for the first time in 4 years of careful hunting, selected something larger than herself. She drove back toward the city as the desert darkened behind her. She drove without speaking, and al-Nakbi did not speak either. Somewhere south of the service road, in a stretch of open desert that appeared on no school record and no personal calendar and no map Rosa Dela Cruz had ever consulted, something that used to be a person was in the ground. Al-Blaushi did not yet know this with certainty. She knew it the way she knew most things before the facts confirmed them. Completely, and without the ability to explain it to anyone who needed the explanation before the facts arrived. Rosa Santos Dela Cruz came to Dubai at 23 years old with a teaching degree, a licensing examination already scheduled, and the specific resolve of someone who has looked at the arithmetic of their family's situation and identified the single variable they can control. She came from Batangas, a coastal town on the southern shore of Luzon where her father went on the water before the sun came up and her mother took in piecework seamstress jobs at the kitchen table, and Rosa was the eldest of 4 children who understood from early childhood that the distance between what the family had and what it needed was measured precisely in her performance. She was not the kind of student who worked hard because she was instructed to. She was the kind who worked hard because she had done the calculation and understood what the answer required. She graduated from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines with an education degree ranked in the top 10% of her cohort. She applied for a UAE teaching visa at 23 because Dubai paid 4 times a Manila teaching salary, and the eldest child of a Batangas fisherman calculates these things accurately when the family depends on the calculation being accurate. She spent her first year in Dubai at a smaller institution in Dera, a private school serving a mixed expatriate community, adequate but unremarkable, a place where Rosa learned the administrative requirements of teaching in the UAE before the Greenfield position opened and her application was accepted. Catherine Moorish would note in Rosa's personnel file, in the margin of the initial teaching assessment, that it was the most naturally gifted classroom observation she had conducted in 9 years of hiring teachers. What made Rosa exceptional was not technique, though the technique was precise. It was something less quantifiable. She treated 5-year-olds as people whose interior lives mattered. She learned every child's name on the first day by writing each one on an index card and studying them the evening before school started. She called parents by their first names and remembered details from previous conversations without notes. She built the wall of names because she wanted the children who sat in her classroom to look at it and understand they were part of a history of people who had sat in those same chairs and learned things and gone forward, and that they were now that history for the children who would come after them. She added each name personally, laminated each card herself, placed each one on the wall with the same care she applied to everything in that room. The wall held 47 names when she disappeared. She had been building it for 4 years. She sent 5,900 dirhams home to Batangas every month. 60% of her 9,800 dirham teaching salary, transferred to her mother Remedios's account without missing once in 6 years. The transfers paid her youngest brother's school fees, her father's boat maintenance, the household bills the family could not cover on their own. The remaining 3,900 dirhams covered her Al-Quaz apartment rent, her groceries, her phone bill, her transportation. She spent almost nothing on herself beyond necessities. She saved 400 dirhams per month into a UAE savings account she called her someday account. 47,200 dirhams accumulated by the time of her death, built 400 dirhams at a time towards something she had not yet named precisely but that involved permanence and belonging to a place because she had built toward it rather than simply arrived in it. She had an Arabic textbook on her nightstand tabbed with post-it notes in her own handwriting. She was on chapter 9. She intended to finish it. She intended, by every visible indicator of how she organized her life and her money and her time, to stay in this city for a long time. Her closest colleague at Greenfield was Priya Naidu, a South African Year 1 teacher who had known Rosa for 4 years and who described her to investigators with the careful precision of someone reconstructing something they now understand differently than they understood it at the time. Priya had met Faris al-Harti twice. The first time was at the school's annual fundraising gala in October. He had come as a representative of his niece's family, found Rosa within 20 minutes of arriving, and stood close to her for the rest of the evening in the specific way of a man communicating a claim without stating it. The second time was at the school gate when he dropped Rosa off on a morning her car was in for service. Priya had described him afterward to her husband as the kind of man aware of every person in every room he entered. Rosa had described him to Priya as the first person in this city who makes me feel like I'm not temporary. Priya had been glad for her and had not asked further questions because Rosa's boundaries were clear without being stated. She told you what she wanted you to know, and the edge of that was not a place you pushed against. What Priya did not know, what no colleague, no friend, no school administrator, no person in Rosa's visible life had any occasion to know, was the false-bottom toiletry bag in the back of the bathroom cabinet, the secondary phone, the offshore accounts, the 8 coded contacts and the 2.3 million dirhams and the 4 years of deliberate, systematic operation conducted in the complete margins of the life that everyone who knew Rosa Dela Cruz understood her to be living. It had begun not with calculation but with accident, which is the most important detail about how it began and the detail Rosa herself returned to in the voice message she recorded in her bathroom with the tap running. 3 days before she disappeared, a married Emirati businessman met at a school fundraising event in Rosa's second year. The relationship lasted 3 months. When he stopped returning her calls, she discovered she had a photograph on her phone from a hotel evening in JBR. Not taken strategically, not planned, simply the casual photographic record of an evening that he would pay to prevent his wife from seeing. She had not planned to use it. She sat with it for 3 days. She looked at what he had and what she had and what he had done, and she sent the message. He paid 85,000 dirhams in 2 transfers. She opened the Seychelles account with 60,000 of it and sent 25,000 to Batangas attributed to a teaching bonus. She told Maricel in the voice message that she felt, after that first payment, not proud and not ashamed but clear. She said, "It was not that I thought it was right. It was that I looked at what he had and what I had and I thought, this is available. I took it." She was careful from the beginning and became more careful across the subsequent 7 targets. The selection criteria tightened over 4 years into something precise. Married, high net worth, prominent enough to have something significant to protect, not so prominent as to have resources that resolve problems outside the channels Rosa understood. She took weeks observing each target before any approach. She prepared hotel rooms in advance, wide-angle lens, timed capture, a fixed position she had identified and tested. She used the secondary phone exclusively for post-photograph contact. She demanded amounts calibrated to the target's financial profile, large enough to constitute real pain, small enough to be paid without requiring the kind of asset conversion that attracted attention. The system worked because the men she selected had exactly one viable response available to them: pay and be silent. They paid. They were silent. They continued their lives. She taught 47 children their names and laminated each one and placed it on the wall and sent 60% of her salary home every month and ran the operation in the margins of all of it with the clean organizational discipline of someone who had decided the 2 lives were separate and would remain separate as long as she was careful. She was careful for 4 years. Then she attended the October fundraising gala in her 4th year at Greenfield, and a man named Faris El-Harti walked through the entrance and found her within 20 minutes and stood close to her for the rest of the evening and asked about the wall of names and asked what someday looked like to her and listened to the answers. She created the folder for him on the secondary phone 4 months into the relationship. Target 8 coded, the photographs begun with the same time capture method she had used for the others. But by the time she created the folder, she already knew that activating it would cost her something the others had not cost her. She created it anyway because she had always held both things simultaneously and had never yet had reason to believe she could not. She thought she could hold them with Faris too. She was wrong about that in the specific way a person is wrong when they are less careful and also in love, which is not the same kind of less careful as the ordinary kind and does not respond to the same corrections. Faris Khalid El-Harti was the youngest of 3 sons and had never in 33 years been required to choose between what he wanted and what his family had decided he would have, because in his experience those 2 things had never substantially diverged. He had been educated in London, UCL, architecture degree, 4 years in Bloomsbury in a flat his father paid for, surrounded by people who found his background interesting and his opinions worth hearing. He had returned to Dubai at 27 to work in the family development company's design division, which was the arrangement his father had always intended and which Faris had always understood was the arrangement, and which he had never examined closely enough to determine whether he had chosen it or simply occupied it the way you occupy a room that has been furnished for you before you arrive. The Al-Harti Group had 12 active developments across the UAE. Khalid Al-Harthi's name appeared on 3 residential towers visible from the highway where Rosa's car would be found. The family's villa in Jumeirah sat behind gates on a street where the houses did not display price tags because the people who could afford them did not need to be told. Faris drove a gray Range Rover. He kept an apartment in Business Bay for the evenings he stayed in the city rather than driving home. He dressed well without appearing to think about it. He was the kind of man who was aware of every person in any room he entered. Priya Naidu had said this to her husband after the October gala, and she had meant it as observation rather than criticism. But it was the kind of observation that contained both. He had found Rosa within 20 minutes of arriving at the gala. He had asked about the wall of names within the first hour. Not performatively, he asked the follow-up question, and then the question after that, and he listened to the answers with the specific attention of someone who is genuinely interested rather than someone demonstrating that they are interested, which is a distinction Rosa recognized because she had spent 4 years around men who demonstrated rather than felt. He asked what someday looked like to her. She told him about the Arabic textbook and the idea of belonging to a place because you had worked toward it rather than simply landed in it. He said he had lived in this city his entire life and had never thought about it that way. She told him that was the difference between arriving somewhere and being from somewhere, that being from somewhere removed the requirement to justify your presence and therefore removed the consciousness of it. He said nothing for a moment and then said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me at one of these events in 4 years of attending them." She had smiled. She had let him get her a drink. She had known, in the specific way she had learned to know things about men over 4 years of studying them carefully, that this one was going to require a different kind of attention than she was accustomed to giving. She created the folder on the secondary phone 4 months into the relationship. Target 8. The same coded structure she had used for the others, the same time capture preparation in the hotel room, the same clinical organization of the photographs once taken. By the time she created the folder, she already understood that activating it would cost her something the previous 7 had not financially, not operationally, but in the specific interior way that a person pays when they use something real as a tool. She created it anyway. She had always held both things simultaneously and had never yet encountered a situation where simultaneous holding proved unsustainable. 2 months after the folder was created, the Al-Harti family announced Faris's engagement to Aisha, daughter of an Abu Dhabi family the Al-Hartis had known for 20 years. The announcement appeared on the family's social media, a formal photograph, the language of the caption using the Arabic construction that signals a long-standing arrangement rather than a new development. Rosa learned about it 3 days after the announcement from a forwarded image that appeared on the secondary phone from a contact she did not identify to anyone. She did not confront Faris immediately. She opened the folder on the secondary phone and added 2 photographs from a hotel evening the previous month, dating and organizing them with the same care she applied to everything in the folder. She sat with the information the way she always sat with information, not reacting before she had determined what reaction served her best. What served her best, she determined, was to continue the relationship as it was while deciding how to use what she had. She had always known the relationship had a ceiling. The engagement defined the ceiling's height more precisely than she had previously calculated. She adjusted her calculations accordingly and continued. 7 months before her disappearance, Faris brought Rosa to a dinner party at the villa of a business associate in the Emirates Hills. The dinner was 14 people. Rosa wore a dark green dress and sat 3 places from Faris at the long table and spoke to the people beside her with the ease of someone who has spent years navigating rooms where she was the only person of her background and has learned to navigate them so well that the navigation itself becomes invisible. Across the table, approximately 8 feet from where Rosa sat, a man named Walid Al-Hamdan watched her from the moment she was introduced. Walid was 49 years old, a business associate of Khalid Al-Harthis, a property developer whose name appeared in the Al-Harthi Group's partnership records going back 11 years. He was also the man Rosa's secondary phone coded as Target 3. He had paid her 220,000 dirhams across 11 months, 2 years before the dinner party, in compliance so complete and so silent that Rosa had not thought about him in over a year. Walid said nothing at the dinner. He called Faris the following morning at 8:47 a.m. The call lasted 23 minutes. Faris's phone records would show it clearly. 23 minutes on a Wednesday morning, after which Faris's phone showed no outgoing activity of any kind for 4 hours. No calls, no messages, no data. For hours of silence while Faris Al-Harthi sat with the knowledge that the woman he had brought to that dinner, the woman who had told him the most honest thing anyone had said to him at a gala in 4 years, had spent the previous 2 years extracting 220,000 dirhams from the man who had just called him in the specific tone of someone delivering information they believe the recipient urgently requires. He did not confront Rosa that day. He sat with the information for 2 weeks. He had the relationship and the knowledge existing simultaneously, and he spent those 2 weeks doing what the investigation would later confirm he told his mother he had done, trying to determine whether the relationship had been real or whether he had been targeted from the beginning. He could not determine it. The folder on the secondary phone had been created 4 months into the relationship, which meant 4 months had passed before Rosa made the operational decision. But 4 months was also long enough for genuine feeling to develop, which meant both readings of the sequence were possible and neither could be confirmed without asking Rosa directly, which would require telling her what Walid had told him, which would activate whatever she had prepared against exactly this scenario. He sat with the uncertainty for 2 weeks. The uncertainty was more frightening than the knowledge because uncertainty was something Faris Al-Harthi had never been required to tolerate and had no capacity to manage. On a Thursday evening, he told Rosa she was pregnant. This is the imprecision in the sentence and it matters. Rosa told Faris she was pregnant. She was 11 weeks. She told him at his Business Bay apartment over dinner she had brought from a restaurant she knew he liked, which was the kind of consideration that existed in parallel with the folder on the secondary phone and was equally genuine, which is the most difficult thing about Rosa Dela Cruz to hold accurately and the most necessary. She told him she was 11 weeks. She told him she expected him to formalize the relationship or face the consequences of not doing so. She did not specify the consequences. She did not need to. Walid had provided the specification 2 weeks earlier in a 23-minute phone call. Ferris was silent for 2 days. Then the calls came in clusters, the secondary phone, not his personal number, which told Rosa that he had been thinking carefully about what records he was creating. She answered the first call. The conversation that followed lasted less than 4 minutes and she ended it. Then the meeting at the hotel in DIFC, which Ferris proposed as a conversation and which Rosa attended understanding she would need to assess in real time what kind of conversation it actually was. She understood within 20 minutes. He was asking questions that were not the questions of a man deciding what to do about a relationship. They were the questions of a man establishing what she knew, what she had documented, what she would do with it, what it would cost to resolve. He was calculating. She had done this herself with other men in other hotel rooms, and she recognized the quality of attention he was applying to her because she had applied it herself. She was being assessed. The difference between herself and the men she had assessed was that she had always held the leverage and they had held only the exposure. She could not determine, sitting across from Faris Al-Harti in a DIFC hotel room, whether that distribution still held. She called him by his full name as she stood to leave. She said, "I know what you were doing just now." He said nothing. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button and waited and did not look back at him. She went home to Al-Quaz. She ran the tap in her bathroom until the sound of the water was sufficient, and she held her phone close to her mouth, and she recorded 6 minutes and 14 seconds in Tagalog, and she sent it to Maricel in Batangas before she turned off the tap. She said his full name in the first 30 seconds. She said the family name. She described the pregnancy and the 10 days and the hotel in DIFC and what she had understood in that room about how the calculation was being run. She said, "I know what I have done. I know what I am. I am not telling you this because I am innocent. I am telling you this because I am scared and because knowing what I am does not mean what happens to me does not matter." She said Maricel's name twice at the end. "If nothing happens, delete this. If something happens, take it to the Philippine consulate and tell them the name I said at the beginning. Just the name." She turned off the tap. She sent the file. She went to bed. She had 3 days left and did not know it. Ferris called his mother on a Tuesday evening 6 days after the DIFC hotel meeting. He had been carrying everything since the meeting, the pregnancy, the knowledge of the folder, the 2 weeks of prior uncertainty, the 4 hours of phone silence the morning after Walid's call. Carrying it the way a man carries things when the carrying has become unsustainable and the only available deposit point is the person who has always absorbed what he could not hold alone. He drove to the family villa in Jumeirah and sat at the kitchen table and told his mother everything in the sequence of a son, who has always told his mother everything and has never before been required to understand what telling her everything costs someone else. Maryam Al-Harti was 58 years old. She had managed the domestic architecture of the Al-Harti family for 30 years with the same precision her husband applied to the commercial architecture of the business, which meant that Khalid Al-Harthi's name appeared on 12 developments and 4 towers and 30 years of financial growth and none of the domestic decisions that had protected all of it. Those decisions belonged to Maryam. She had made them quietly, consistently, and without requiring acknowledgement from anyone outside the family. She was not a woman who needed acknowledgement. She was a woman who needed outcomes. The distinction had served the family well for 3 decades and would serve it again tonight. She understood, if she managed it correctly. She listened to Ferris without interrupting. He told her about Rosa, the relationship, its duration, the October gala where it began. He told her about Walid's call and the 2 weeks of uncertainty and the DIFC meeting and what Rosa had said as she left. He told her about the pregnancy. 11 weeks. He told her about the secondary phone, what Walid had described, what the operation appeared to be, the 7 prior targets, the offshore accounts. He told her about the engagement and that Aisha's family was already planning the spring ceremony and that the guest list had been submitted to the venue. He told her all of this in one continuous account because that was how he always told his mother things when he was frightened enough. Completely without editing, handing her the problem in its entirety and waiting for her to locate the resolution he could not locate himself. Miriam was quiet for a long moment after he finished. Then she asked 3 questions. The first, how long has this been going on? Ferris told her, 14 months. The second, how much does she know about the family's finances specifically, not your personal finances? The family's. Ferris said he did not believe she had accessed anything beyond what he had provided through the relationship's ordinary financial footprint. Dinners, hotels, the transfers on the secondary phone. Miriam nodded. The third question, what route does she drive home from the school? Ferris told her. He told her that Rosa drove south from Greenfield International School in Jumeirah and took the Al-Ain Road on Tuesdays because the traffic on Sheikh Zayed ran heavy in the late afternoon and the Al-Ain Road moved better. He told her Rosa stayed at the school until 5:30 on Tuesdays to finish her weekly lesson planning and left the parking structure at approximately 5:30 to 5:40. He told her Rosa drove a white Honda Jazz and parked in Bay 34 of the school's parking structure. He knew what the third question meant. The investigation would return to this point across 11 months of building the case, and the trial would address it directly in the prosecution's closing argument, and it would never be fully resolved whether Ferris Al-Harti understood with complete clarity what he was providing when he answered the third question or whether he had retreated into the specific willed unawareness of a man who has decided not to fully know something. Because full knowledge requires full accountability. What the record shows is that he answered it. He told his mother the route and the day and the time and the car. He told her everything she needed. Then he drove home to his apartment in Business Bay and did not call Rosa that evening and did not call her the following morning. He attended a design review meeting at the Al-Harti Group offices on Wednesday at 10 a.m. and contributed 3 items to the agenda. Miriam made 2 phone calls after Ferris left the kitchen table. The first was to a man named Bassem Noor. The second was to confirm the catering arrangements for the engagement dinner the following Thursday. Bassem Noor was 47 years old, Lebanese, operating in Dubai under a consulting firm registered in Ras Al Khaimah whose commercial license listed corporate logistics and private security services as its scope of operations. He had no criminal record in the UAE. He had been connected to the Al-Harti family for 11 years, initially through a legitimate security contract for a construction site in Al-Quaz, subsequently through the kind of retained informal relationship that families with resources develop with people who resolve problems without creating documentation. He had handled 3 prior matters for the family. All 3 had been financial. A business partner who required persuading, a procurement dispute that needed pressure applied at a specific point, a contractor whose silence had been required in exchange for a settlement. None of the 3 had required what Miriam described on the phone Tuesday evening. She used the word containment. She said the woman was a professional extortionist with an active operation and documented history, and that the family's exposure extended beyond Ferris personally to the broader financial architecture of the business. She said she needed it resolved without visibility. She said the usual arrangement applied and that the scope of this particular matter would be reflected in the fee accordingly. Bassem Noor asked 2 questions. He asked for the route and the schedule. Miriam read him what Ferris had told her from the notes she had made at the kitchen table while Ferris was talking. She had been making notes throughout. She had known she would need them. Bassem Noor sourced 2 men through a logistics contact he had used for physical work on prior unrelated matters. Their names would take investigators 3 months to establish through communication records on a phone Noor believed was clean and which was not. He sourced a rental vehicle on Monday morning at a cash transaction rental company in the Al-Quaz industrial area. A Toyota Land Cruiser, older model, dark gray, wider wheelbase. He paid cash. He gave a name that was not his to the rental clerk. The company's CCTV captured him from the right side angle as he completed the transaction. Partial face, insufficient for standalone identification, sufficient for corroboration when placed beside everything else the investigation assembled. He drove the route from Greenfield International School south along the Al-Ain Road on Monday afternoon in the rental vehicle. Timing the drive, identifying the service road off the highway that offered the isolation and the absence of camera coverage his assessment required. He confirmed the service road on a second reconnaissance pass Tuesday morning before dawn. He returned the rental to a holding location in the industrial area and briefed the 2 men on the Tuesday afternoon schedule. At 5:31 p.m. on Tuesday, Rosa Dela Cruz locked her classroom door and walked to the parking structure and crossed the ground floor to her white Honda Jazz in Bay 34. The school's parking structure camera captured her at 5:31 p.m. She drove south. One of Bassem Noor's men had been in the parking structure in a separate vehicle since 5 p.m. He followed the Honda Jazz from a distance sufficient not to be noticed and called the second number on the phone at 5:38 p.m. when Rosa took the Align Road south as Ferris had said she always did on Tuesdays. What happened on the service road is reconstructed in the investigation through the forensic record rather than through witness account, because there were no witnesses and the two men Bassem Noor used did not provide detailed accounts in their eventual statements. The forensic record shows the rental Land Cruiser stationary alongside the Honda Jazz for between 15 and 40 minutes, the gravel compression indicating a transfer of weight consistent with a person being moved from one vehicle to the other. The Honda Jazz remaining on the service road after the Land Cruiser moved south. The Land Cruiser not returning on the track it created going south. The Salik toll gate 4.3 kilometers north recording the rental vehicle's transponder, registered to the cash transaction rental in Al-Quaz, outbound at 9:43 p.m., a direction and time consistent with the service road location, and returning at 1:17 a.m. in the direction of the city. Bassem Noor drove back into Dubai at 1:17 a.m. He submitted a logistics invoice to the consulting company the following morning and went to sleep, and on Thursday evening attended a dinner with 3 professional contacts and did not discuss the service road or the Align Highway or a white Honda Jazz sitting alone on a gravel shoulder with a school ID on the dashboard. The following Thursday Faris Al-Harti attended his engagement dinner at a villa in Jumeirah. He was photographed standing beside Aisha, whose family had traveled from Abu Dhabi for the occasion. The photograph appeared on the family's social media the following morning. He is looking at the camera in the photograph with the composed directness of someone who has decided to present themselves as exactly what they are. He is smiling. Rosa Dela Cruz's body was found 23 days after her disappearance by a geological survey team conducting a ground assessment in an uninhabited stretch of desert 14 kilometers south of the service road. The team leader called 999 at 7:42 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Al-Bloushi was notified at 8:15 a.m. and drove to the location with Al-Nakbi, arriving at 9:03 a.m. after a drive that covered the service road where the Honda Jazz had been found and then continued south on a track that the survey team's GPS coordinates indicated, and which Al-Bloushi followed in her department vehicle across open desert without speaking. Identification was made through dental records provided by Greenfield International School, which maintained comprehensive medical documentation for all teaching staff. Cause of death: asphyxiation. Time in the ground: approximately 20 days, consistent with the Tuesday of her disappearance. The pathology reports section 4 notation. She was 11 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. Al-Bloushi read the pathology report sitting in her car 14 kilometers south of the service road with the desert flat and empty in every direction, and the sky the specific pale colorless blue of a March morning in the UAE that contains no weather and no cloud and no relief from the light. She read section for once. She set the report on the passenger seat. She looked through the windshield for a long moment at the place where the survey team had found what they found and which now had forensic markers around it and technicians working it and would have a case number attached to it and would eventually have a verdict attached to the case number. She thought about the secondary phone in the false bottom toiletry bag. She thought about the offshore accounts and the 2.3 million dirhams and the 7 coded contacts and the time capture photographs organized into folders by a woman who understood systems and built them well. She thought about the wall of 47 names under laminate and the someday account with 47,200 dirhams accumulated 400 dirhams at a time towards something not yet named. She thought about the Arabic textbook on chapter 9 and the dried coffee ring on the windowsill of a classroom that had been prepared for a Wednesday that its teacher did not arrive to deliver. She did not allow herself to resolve the 2 portraits into one because they did not resolve. They did not cancel each other. They were both accurate and both true, and the job was to hold them both without letting either one decide what the case was about. What the case was about was a decision made at a kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, and an answer to a third question, and a route home on a Tuesday night, and a woman who was 11 weeks pregnant walking to her car in Bay 34, with her keys already in her right hand, and the desert that had held her for 20 days before anyone thought to look this far south. She started the engine. She drove back toward the highway. Behind her the forensic markers stood in the open desert in the flat pale morning light, and the technicians worked, and the city was an hour north, and in a glass-walled office in the Al-Harti Group's development company, a man named Faris was attending a meeting, and in a villa in Jumeirah a woman named Maryam was making coffee, and in Ras Al Khaimah a man named Bassem Noor was reviewing an invoice, and none of them knew yet that the geological survey team had been scheduled for that particular stretch of desert on that particular Thursday morning. Bassem Noor had accounted for many things. He had not accounted for the survey team's schedule. Al-Blaushi drove north and did not stop until she reached the office and opened the case file and began building toward them. The apartment search in Al-Quaz happened on day 3 of the investigation, before the body was found, when the case was still formally classified as a missing person with suspected foul play. Al-Blaushi had requested the warrant on day 2, citing the abandoned vehicle, the tire tracks, and the absence of any voluntary departure indication. The warrant was granted Thursday afternoon and executed Friday morning at 9 a.m. with Al-Nakbi and 2 officers from the Forensic Processing Unit. The apartment communicated Rosa Dela Cruz precisely. Organized, considered, nothing left unfinished. The kitchen wall calendar with school schedule blocks in blue and personal reminders in red, including a Sunday notation that read "Call Mama," repeated on every Sunday across the full calendar year. The Arabic textbook on the nightstand, intermediate level, post-it tabs in Rosa's handwriting marking chapters 1 through 8 as completed, chapter 9 marked with a tab that said continue. The framed family photograph on the windowsill. Her parents and 3 siblings on a Batangas beach. The light, the specific flat gold of a late Philippine afternoon. Everyone squinting slightly into the sun. The someday account passbook in the top left desk drawer. The balance column showing 47,200 dirhams accumulated in 400 dirham monthly increments across the full span of 6 years. The final entry dated the 1st of the previous month. The apartment held the texture of a life built carefully by someone who understood that careful building was the only kind that lasted. The bathroom cabinet held standard contents organized by frequency of use. Al-Nakbi moved through it systematically while Al-Blaushi processed the bedroom. He noted the toiletry bag at the back of the cabinet's lower shelf. Black nylon, travel-sized, placed with the specific intentionality of something being kept rather than the casual positioning of something simply stored. He lifted it, set it on the bathroom counter, pressed the base at the corners. The 4th corner depressed slightly under pressure. He pressed harder. The false bottom released. Inside, in a sealed Ziploc bag, a secondary phone, powered off. A charging cable coiled beside it in a second smaller bag. He called to Al-Blaushi without raising his voice. She came to the bathroom doorway and looked at the false bottom and looked at Al-Nakbi and said nothing. The phone was logged into evidence at 11:47 a.m. It was in the digital forensics unit by 2 p.m. Forensic technician Noura Al-Mansouri began the decryption process at 3:30 p.m. The phone's password was a 6-digit numerical sequence. The decryption software cracked it at 10:23 p.m., 6 hours and 53 minutes. Noura called Al-Blaushi at 10:31 p.m. Al-Blaushi drove to the forensics unit and sat with Noura in the processing room and worked through the phone's contents from the beginning, which was where she always started. The foundation before the structure, the beginning before the conclusion. 8 coded contacts. No real names. Each contact a letter number combination that corresponded to nothing in any public record. 2 banking applications, one connected to an account in the Seychelles, one to an account in Hong Kong. The Seychelles account balance at last login, 847,000 dirhams. The Hong Kong account balance, approximately 1.4 million dirhams. Transfer records showing incoming payments from 7 distinct sources across 4 years. None traceable to a named individual at the transaction level. All routed through intermediate accounts in jurisdictions selected for their limited disclosure requirements. 8 photograph folders organized by coded contact name. Each folder containing between 3 and 7 images taken with a wide-angle lens from a fixed position in hotel rooms. Time capture, the subjects unaware. Clinical. Sufficient. The word sufficient was the word Al-Blaushi wrote in her case notes to describe them, because sufficient was what Rosa had calibrated them to be, enough to constitute a threat, no more than the threat required. The 8th folder was labeled with a code that the forensic accountant would eventually match to Faris Al-Harti. It contained 5 photographs from 3 hotel evenings. The most recent was dated 2 months before Rosa's disappearance and 4 months after the engagement announcement the family had published on their social media. Al-Blaushi sat with the 8th folder for a long time. She noted the dates. She noted the gap between the engagement announcement and the most recent photograph. She noted what the gap meant about the sequence, that Rosa had continued building the folder after she knew about the engagement, which meant the folder had been activated or was being prepared for activation at approximately the time Ferris told his mother everything at the kitchen table. 2 parallel preparations running toward each other across the same 2-month window. One ended on a service road off the Dubai Al Ain highway. The other ended in a folder on a phone in a false-bottom toiletry bag that Noura Al-Mansouri was cataloging at 2 a.m. in a forensics unit in Dubai, while the engagement dinner photographs were still visible on the Al-Harti family's social media if you knew where to look. Al-Blaushi returned to her desk at 2:30 a.m. with the processing notes. She sat with the 2 portraits of Rosa Dela Cruz, the teacher and the operator, the wall of names and the offshore accounts, and she wrote one sentence in the margin of her case file. The second life explains the motive. It does not explain the decision. Find the decision. She underlined it. She went home at 3:15 a.m. and returned at 7 a.m., and by the time she received the call from Al-Nakbi at 8:15 a.m., saying the geological survey team had found something 14 kilometers south of the service road, she had already identified Ferris Al-Harti as the primary person of investigative interest from the 8th folder's contents, and had already submitted a request for his cell tower data for the Tuesday evening before the disappearance, and had already written his name at the top of a new page in the case file. She drove south to where the survey team had found what they found. She drove back. She opened the next section of the file. She continued building. The voice message arrived 11 days after the body was identified. Maricel Dela Cruz in Batangas had received it at midnight on the night Rosa recorded it. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. Tagalog, the tap running throughout, had listened to it, had called Rosa's number and received no answer, and had waited. She had waited because Rosa was in Dubai and she was in Batangas, and she did not know which authority in Dubai would listen to a cousin calling from the Philippines to report a feeling, which was what the voice message was before Rosa disappeared and what it became after. When the Philippine consular officer in Dubai contacted Maricel directly following the identification of the body, Maricel sent the file within the hour. She had been holding it for 14 days. She sent it with a message to the consular officer that read, "She told me what to do if something happened. I waited too long. Please make sure someone listens to it." Al-Blaushi received the file at 9:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. She played it with Al-Nakbi present in her office with the door closed. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. The tap running throughout. Ferris Al-Harthi's full name in the first 30 seconds. The family name, the pregnancy, the 10 days, the DIFC hotel meeting and what Rosa understood in that room about the quality of attention being directed at her. Then the line that Al-Blaushi played 11 times across the investigation and once more on the morning of the trial's opening session. "I know what I have done. I know what I am. I am not telling you this because I am innocent. I am telling you this because I am scared and because knowing what I am does not mean what happens to me does not matter." Then Maricel's name twice. The instruction, "If nothing happens, delete this. If something happens, take it to the Philippine consulate and tell them the name I said at the beginning. Just the name." When the 6 minutes and 14 seconds ended and the tap that Rosa had run to cover the sound of her own voice stopped and the file was silent, Al-Nakbi looked at his desk. Al-Blaushi looked at the wall above her monitor. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Al-Blaushi picked up the case file and wrote the name Maricel had been told to give the consulate, Ferris Khalid Al-Harti, under the name she had written from the 8th folder's forensic processing 11 days earlier. The same name, arrived at from 2 directions. She submitted the cell tower warrant request for Mariam Al-Harthi's phone that afternoon, in addition to the request already submitted for Ferris. She submitted the Salik toll gate records request for all vehicles registered to the Al-Harti family's portfolio of companies for the Tuesday and Wednesday of the disappearance window. She submitted the request to the Al-Quaz industrial area rental companies for cash vehicle transactions in the 5 days preceding the disappearance. She submitted all 4 requests simultaneously. She did not wait for the results of one before filing the next. She had learned over 15 years that the cases that came apart were the ones where the investigator waited for confirmation before committing to the next step. The next step was always already visible if you had built the foundation correctly. The Salik toll gate records arrived in 2 days. The rental company records arrived in 4. The cell tower data for both Faris and Mariam al-Harti arrived in 6. The forensic accountant, a meticulous man named Rami Haddad assigned from the prosecution's Financial Crimes Division, was given the offshore account records and the transfer histories from the secondary phone and submitted his first findings report in 6 weeks. His covering note to al-Blaushi read, 4 layers of corporate structure between the instruction and the payment. It was built by someone who understood corporate architecture. It was not built by someone who anticipated forensic accounting applied with sufficient patience. The Salik records showed a vehicle registered to a shell company connected to Bassem Noor's consulting firm passing the highway toll gate outbound at 9:43 p.m. Tuesday and returning at 1:17 a.m. The rental company's CCTV showed a man matching Bassem Noor's physical profile, completing a cash transaction on the Monday before the disappearance. The tire track forensics from the service road matched the wheelbase and tread pattern of a Toyota Land Cruiser consistent with the model in the rental company's fleet. Faris al-Harthi's cell tower data placed his phone at the location of the family villa in Jumeirah, his mother's kitchen, on the Tuesday evening before the disappearance for a duration consistent with the account he would eventually provide. Mariam al-Harthi's phone records showed 2 outgoing calls made within 40 minutes of the cell tower data placing Faris at the villa. The first call's number traced to a phone registered to Bassem Noor's consulting company. The second call traced to the caterer for the engagement dinner. Rami Haddad closed the invoice chain in 6 weeks. The chain ran through 3 shell entities, 1 registered in Ras Al Khaimah, 1 in Oman, 1 in a British Virgin Islands holding structure, before terminating in a payment from an account connected to the Al-Harti Group's property management subsidiary. The payment amount corresponded to an invoice from Bassem Noor's consulting company for corporate logistics services rendered during the week of Rosa's disappearance. The invoice was dated the Wednesday after the Tuesday of her death. Bassem Noor had billed the al-Harti family for Rosa Dela Cruz's murder the morning after it occurred, and the al-Harti family had paid the invoice within 7 business days through their standard accounts payable process. Rami Haddad submitted his final findings report with a note at the bottom that said simply, "Paid on time. No disputes raised." Bassem Noor was arrested at his Ras Al Khaimah office at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning 11 weeks after the body was identified. 2 officers from Dubai CID and 2 from the Ras Al Khaimah force. He was at his desk reviewing a logistics tender when the officers entered. He looked at them with the specific calm of a man who has known this moment was coming and has prepared for it as thoroughly as he prepares for everything, and who discovers in the first hour of interrogation that his preparation did not account for the rental company's CCTV footage from the right side angle, or the toll gate records' precision, or Rami Haddad's patience with 4 layers of corporate structure, or the phone he had believed was clean and which was not. The 2 hired men were located through communication records on that phone within 48 hours of Noor's arrest. Both in Dubai. Both arrested at their residential addresses without incident. Faris al-Harti was arrested at the Al-Harti Group Development Company's offices at 11:15 a.m. on a Thursday morning, timed simultaneously with his mother's arrest at the family villa to prevent communication between defendants. He was in a glass-walled meeting room on the 14th floor with 3 colleagues reviewing architectural renderings for a development in Ras Al Khaimah when al-Blaushi and al-Nakbi entered the building lobby. The lobby receptionist called up to the meeting room. Faris saw al-Blaushi cross the lobby toward the elevators before she reached them. He watched her cross the marble floor. He said something to his colleagues that none of them would clearly remember afterward. He stood when al-Blaushi entered the meeting room. He held out his wrists before she stated the charges. He said nothing then and said nothing during the booking and said nothing through the charge reading. It was the only decision he had made in the entire sequence of events that demonstrated any understanding of consequences. He should have made it at the kitchen table in Jumeirah when his mother asked the 3rd question. He made it 11 months too late, in a glass-walled meeting room on the 14th floor of a building his family had built, while the architectural renderings for the Ras Al Khaimah development were still spread across the table behind him. The trial of Faris al-Harti, Mariam al-Harti, Bassem Noor, and the two hired men began in Dubai criminal court on a Monday morning 7 months after the arrests. The courtroom was not large. The gallery held 60 people. Every seat was occupied on the first morning and remained occupied for every subsequent session. The Filipino community in Dubai had maintained a visible and sustained presence throughout the investigation. Consular representatives at every police briefing they were permitted to attend, vigils outside the Philippine Overseas Workers Office, the specific organized persistence of a community that understood cases involving foreign nationals required continuous attention to remain priorities and had decided, collectively and without instruction, to provide that attention until the case concluded. They sat in the gallery. They stood in the corridor outside when the gallery was full. They held photographs. Several of the photographs showed Rosa in her white clinic coat from the Greenfield staff page. Several showed her at the October gala the year before her disappearance, standing beside Priya Naidu, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Ferris sat at the defendant's table with two attorneys and said nothing that his attorneys did not direct him to say, which across the full duration of the trial amounted to very little. Mariam Al-Harti sat at the adjacent table with her own attorney and said nothing at all, which her attorney characterized as a constitutional right and which the prosecution characterized in its closing argument as the silence of a woman who had spent 30 years understanding precisely what her words cost, and had made a final calculation about this particular set of words and arrived at the same answer she had always arrived at. Silence was the position that preserved the most. Bassem Noor and the two hired men were represented separately and sat at a third table. Bassem Noor watched the proceedings with the attentive stillness of a man reviewing a contract for errors. He found no errors. The invoice chain had held in court exactly as Rami Haddad had assembled it. Senior Public Prosecutor Nadia Al-Hamadi presented the opening statement in 38 minutes. She addressed Rosa's second life in the first 5 minutes, before the defense could use it as a frame, because she understood that the secondary phone and the offshore accounts and the coded folders would be the defense's primary instrument for redirecting the court's attention from what had been decided to who had been targeted. She told the court, Rosa Dela Cruz was a criminal. She extorted 8 men across 4 years and extracted 2.3 million dirhams from them through photographs taken in hotel rooms. None of this is in dispute. None of this is what this trial is about. She told the court, a woman's history of wrongdoing does not constitute authorization for her execution. The prosecution does not ask this court to evaluate Rosa Dela Cruz's character. It asks this court to evaluate a decision made at a kitchen table when a mother asked a son what route a woman drove home and the son answered. That answer is what this trial is about. Grace Domingo, Priya Naidu in this story, testified on the second day. She had flown from South Africa where she had relocated 6 months after Rosa's disappearance. Having found she could not remain in the school after the investigation confirmed what the investigation confirmed. She sat in the witness chair with the composed directness of someone who has spent 7 months preparing to say the things she was not permitted to say while the investigation was building. She described Rosa's relationship with Ferris as Rosa had described it to her. The first person in this city who makes me feel like I'm not temporary. She described the October gala. She described the morning Ferris dropped Rosa at the school gate and the specific quality of his attention to every person in the lobby. She described what she had not known, the secondary phone, the offshore accounts, and what she had known, that Rosa had seemed, in the final weeks before her disappearance, to be carrying something she was not ready to put down and could not fully hold. The voice message was played on the third day of the trial. Al-Hamadi played it without preface. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. The tap running throughout. Ferris Al-Harthi's full name in the first 30 seconds. Maricel, sitting in the front row of the gallery, looked at the front of the room throughout and did not look at the defendant's table. She was the only person in the courtroom who had known both versions of Rosa Dela Cruz and had loved her in both of them without requiring the two versions to resolve into one, which is the only uncomplicated thing in the entire case and which is worth saying clearly because nothing else about it is uncomplicated. When the 6 minutes and 14 seconds ended and the courtroom was silent in the specific way of a room full of people absorbing the voice of someone who knew she was making a final record and made it anyway, Maricel looked at her hands in her lap. She did not look up for a long moment. When she did, she looked at the front of the room again. She did not look at Ferris. Layla was referenced in Al-Hamadi's closing argument without her name. The passage was brief and the courtroom was quiet when it was delivered. Al-Hamadi said, "A child in this woman's classroom understood that her teacher was scared and that someone should do something about it. She told her mother. Her mother called the school. That call is why this investigation assembled what it assembled. A 5-year-old girl understood something about bravery that the defendant's entire family, with all its resources and all its carefully constructed problem resolution infrastructure, did not. Being brave means doing the right thing when you are scared. Miss Rosa told her that. Miss Rosa was still trying to act on it when she ran out of time to act on anything further. The defense presented its case across 3 days. Ferris's attorneys argued that the voice message established Rosa's operational intent, that the pregnancy disclosure was itself a form of activation of the blackmail system, that the distinction between a vulnerable woman and a professional extortionist disclosing leverage was legally material to the question of what Ferris had understood he was communicating to his mother when he answered the third question. Miriam's attorney argued that a mother receiving information from a frightened son about an active extortion operation targeting her family could not be held to the standard of having anticipated and sanctioned murder when she made a phone call to a security consultant. Bassem Noor's attorney did not dispute the invoice chain. He argued that Noor had understood his instructions as physical intimidation sufficient to end the threat, not execution, and that the escalation to murder was a unilateral decision by the hired men that Noor could not have anticipated and had not authorized. Al-Hamadi addressed all 3 arguments in a closing that lasted 40 minutes. She addressed the defense's reframing of Rosa with one question. Does the fact that a woman was extorting the man who killed her transfer authorization for her killing to him? She addressed the mother's phone call with Miriam's second phone call, to the caterer, confirming the engagement dinner, made within 40 minutes of the call to Bassem Noor, and asked the court to consider what that sequence communicated about the state of mind of a woman placing the first call. She addressed Bassem Noor's claimed misunderstanding of his instructions with the invoice. She read the invoice aloud. She read the payment confirmation. She said, "This is not the invoice of a man who believed he had done something other than what was intended. This is the invoice of a man who knew the job was complete and billed accordingly." The court deliberated for 8 days. Bassem Noor, convicted of murder and criminal conspiracy. Life imprisonment. He showed no expression when the verdict was read, which was consistent with every expression he had shown throughout the trial, which is to say he showed the expression of a man who had reviewed a contract and found it was enforceable. The 2 hired men, convicted as co-conspirators in the murder. 22 years each. Mariam al-Harti, convicted of criminal conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to murder. Life imprisonment. She looked at her attorney when the verdict was read. She did not look at the judges. She did not look at Ferris. She looked at her attorney and the attorney looked back and neither of them said anything, and after a moment Mariam al-Harti looked at the table. She was 58 years old and she had managed the architecture of a family for 30 years, and the architecture had held until it required a woman to be driven into a desert on a Tuesday night in March, and she had made the call that required that, and the call had held until Rami Haddad and Noura al-Mansouri and a geological survey team and a consular officer who called Maricel at the right moment had assembled the structure of it and brought it into a courtroom and read it aloud. The architecture had held for 30 years. The court held it for 8 days and found it sufficient. The verdict was read. She looked at the table. Ferris al-Harti, convicted of criminal conspiracy to commit murder. The prosecution had argued for the higher charge. The court found the evidence sufficient for conspiracy, establishing that he had knowingly provided the route and the schedule and the car and the Tuesday timing in full understanding of what the third question meant and what his answer would enable. 20 years. When the verdict was read, he looked at the floor. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at Maricel. He did not look at the judges or his attorneys or his mother at the adjacent table. He looked at the floor and he continued looking at it while the session was closed and the courtroom began to clear and the gallery filed out and Maricel stood and straightened her jacket and walked toward the exit without looking at the defendant's table. He was 33 years old. He had never in his life been required to choose between what he wanted and what his family had decided he would have. He had been required to choose once, at a kitchen table, between answering a question and understanding what answering it would cost. He had answered it. The floor of a Dubai criminal court is what that answer looked like when 20 years of it was set down in one place. Khalid al-Harti was not charged. The evidence of his knowledge of the operation was assessed as insufficient to meet the charging threshold. The prosecution challenged this determination. The challenge did not succeed. Khalid al-Harti attended no sessions of the trial. His name appeared in no verdict. His name appears on 3 towers visible from the highway where Rosa's car was found. The towers remain. Maricel Dela Cruz flew back to Batangas the day after the sentencing. She gave no media interviews during the trial and declined every request after it. She said one thing to the consular officer who accompanied her to the airport, the same officer who had called her and asked for the voice message file 14 days after Rosa disappeared, the call that had ended Maricel's waiting. She told me exactly what to do if something happened and I waited 14 days before I did it. The consular officer told her she had done exactly what Rosa asked. Maricel said, "I know. That is what I have to live with." Remedios Dela Cruz in Batangas received 2 estate transfers in the months following the trial's conclusion. The first was the someday account, 47,200 dirhams, accumulated 400 dirhams at a time across 6 years, toward a future that had a name Rosa had not yet given it. The second was the offshore accounts, the 2.3 million dirhams from the Seychelles and Hong Kong accounts, reduced by legal and estate fees. The remainder transferred to Remedios after the estate proceedings established no competing claims. The estate attorneys did not explain the second transfer's origin. Remedios received it with the particular stillness of a woman absorbing something she understands imperfectly and accepts completely. She continues to attend the 6 a.m. mass she attended every morning while Rosa was in Dubai and the Sunday phone calls were still coming. The Sunday calls have stopped. The mass has not. The wall of 47 names at Greenfield International School was kept intact through the full academic year following Rosa's disappearance. Catherine Morish's decision, made the morning after the identification of the body and maintained without public announcement through the following June. Rosa's class moved up to Year 1 at the end of the academic year. On the last day of June, Catherine Morish entered the empty classroom and removed each laminated name from the wall carefully, beginning with Oliver's, the 47th, added in January, and working backward through the 4 years of names to the first ones Rosa had laminated, whose edges had softened slightly with time. She placed all 47 in a large envelope and sealed it and wrote Rosa's name on the front and placed it in the school's administrative archive. The wall was repainted. The new Year 1 teacher decided not to replicate the wall. She said she did not think she could do it the way Rosa did it. She was right. You cannot do it the way Rosa did it unless you are Rosa, which required being a person who believed simultaneously in the wall of people who already know they matter and in the false bottom of a toiletry bag, which required being a person who sent 400 dirhams a month toward a someday and 220,000 dirhams per target toward an account in the Seychelles, which required being a person the world did not have a clean category for and who therefore occupied both categories simultaneously for 4 years until the categories collapsed into a service road off the Dubai Al Ain highway at 9:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. The 8th code remains unidentified. 2 photographs in a folder on a secondary phone in the Federal Evidence Archive. A transfer record showing 320,000 dirhams from a source the forensic accountant spent 3 months pursuing and could not close. Whoever paid Rosa Dela Cruz 320,000 dirhams across 2 payments in the 14 months before her disappearance continues, in this city, in some office or villa or life arranged exactly as they intended, to be unidentified. Al-Blaushi submitted a supplementary inquiry request before the case file went into the archive. The request remains pending. The investigation is ongoing on that strand. Detective Jumeirah Al-Blaushi drove to the service road off the Dubai Al Ain highway on a quiet morning the week after the sentencing. She drove alone. She parked on the gravel shoulder where the white Honda Jazz had been found with the door slightly ajar and the school ID on the dashboard. She got out of her car and walked to the place where the second vehicle's tire tracks had been documented in the gravel. The compression from 15 to 40 minutes of weight, the displacement consistent with a transfer, and she stood there for a long time looking south at the desert where the track ran and did not return. The desert showed nothing now. The forensic markers were long gone. The gravel had been disturbed by wind and time and gave no indication of what had passed over it. The highway behind her carried the ordinary morning traffic of a city conducting its ordinary morning. She stood there until she had stood there long enough. Then she got back in her car and drove north toward the city, and the case file went into the archive that afternoon, and she opened the next file on her desk and she continued. Rosa Dela Cruz was 29 years old. She had a wall of 47 names in children's handwriting. She had a someday account with 47,200 dirhams and no destination yet assigned to it. She had a mother she called every Sunday. She had an Arabic textbook on chapter 9. She had an offshore account and a secondary phone and a false bottom in a toiletry bag and a folder for every man who had learned what it cost to be selected by her. She had built 2 lives for 4 years and maintained them in complete separation and believed she understood the perimeter of what she was doing and who she could safely do it to. She was wrong about 1 perimeter, 1 target, 1 family, 1 kitchen table, 1 answer to 1/3 question on one Tuesday evening. Between the question and the answer, a woman who was 11 weeks pregnant ceased to exist as a problem to be resolved, and the desert held her for 20 days before anyone thought to look that far south. She had been careful for 4 years. She had prepared a record and sent it to the one person she trusted and told that person exactly what to do with it. The record reached a courtroom. The courtroom reached a verdict. The verdict reached Faris al-Harti at a defendant's table while he looked at the floor. None of it reached Rosa. The someday account reached her mother. The 47 names reached an archive in an envelope with Rosa's name on the front. The Arabic textbook reached chapter 9 and stopped. Some things stop where they stop, and the stopping is the most honest ending available and the only one this case permits.